Intersectionality and Professional Breathwork. Hello, I'm Jim Morningstar, Director of Transformations Incorporated, founder of Therapeutic Breathwork, and co-director of the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance. As a clinical psychologist and professional breathworker and trainer since the mid-1970s, it's been my privilege and passion to be a student and teacher in the field of breathwork. As a student, I'm continually learning about the power and potential of conscious breathing practices, ancient techniques, and newly developed applications. My intent in addressing new and sometimes challenging topics in human growth and development is to show how I believe breathwork has a specific role to play in the cutting edge of our evolution at this time on our planet. Most current issues grow from seeds in the past, but the issues I select are being addressed with a new fervor by generations which have the courage to break the mold of outworn, institutionalized behaviors and public policies which allow fear to hold them in place. This is generally a collective fear. It's in all of us, not just a few in power. It's our fear that gives any oppressive model of leadership its power. This is where breathwork offers a tool for more than personal trauma release, but leads to collective consciousness revival and liberation. This is not a political polemic, but a practical, everyday expediency. Leonard Orr, who has been acknowledged as the founder of modern-day rebirthing breathwork, had this vision strongly in his teachings and writings. For example, his book, How to Make Democracy Work. He saw that breathing freely leads to living freely, and both had to be made practical, conscious, and available to everyone on the planet. This was his mission, and it has led to a grassroots groundswell. We are the heirs of this legacy. Intersectionality is a natural outgrowth of this planetary consciousness shift. As breathworkers, I believe we are called to support such movements with our awareness, our bodies, and our practices. Intersectionality is broadly defined as the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender, as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage, which, from my perspective, can also be sources of mutual learning, empowerment, and growth if owned and dealt with consciously and respectfully. Examples of these factors include gender, caste, sex, race, class, sexuality, religion, disability, physical appearance, and even height. These intersecting and overlapping social identities may be both empowering or oppressing. As a healing process, breathwork cuts across all this social classification and is not confined or defined by any one of them. As a breathworker or breathwork client, however, how we present ourselves and function in any one of these roles is influenced by all of our socially ascribed categories. I do not believe to be a quality healer we must endeavor to eliminate social roles, but I do believe an awareness of how they shape our perceptions and influence our communications and behaviors can help us minimize the way they can obstruct our work. Awareness can help us become conscious of our blind spots and more aware of the sensitivities of others, thus helping our acuity, or what I call holy vision, that is, seeing the whole person, including their fear-based personality and their spiritual core. For example, being aware that I am a tall, white, male breathworker whose mere presence may have triggering factors to a great number of potential clients, There are ways I've helped to position my environment to reduce common fear stimuli when interviewing a new culturally identified sexual female client. For example, having a female office person present, having the room brightly lit and warmly decorated, the client's comfortable chair being closest to the door out of my office, as well as my personal presentation. For example, a prosodic voice, cheery but not brusque movements, solicitous of amenities, where the lavatory is located, as well as drinking water or tea, etc. But even with all my conscious precautions, there can be a host of unconscious factors affecting our rapport and my client's comfort. For example, my Midwestern accent, my posture, my mode of dress, eye contact, being too ingratiating or not enough, etc., as well as my values and expectations that I've incorporated from my family and culture. Now, there's no way to make a person feel safe, but there are ways to pick up on their fears and be alert to cues that signal their nervous system's degree of self-regulation. My intention in this presentation is to help increase our awareness of the cultural determinants most likely to trigger feelings of disempowerment in ourselves and our clients, and present ways we can increase the effectiveness of our delivery of breathwork to a diversity of clients. We'll be looking at how cues of status have importance for our social identity and how it has shaped our personal identity, as well as the components of social identity that are most salient in our society. This entails examining the interconnected nature of social categorization, such as race, class, and gender, as they apply to a given individual or group, and how they can create overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. The intersectionality lens allows us to better acknowledge and ground the differences among us. For a breathworker, there are key skills that help us navigate through these currents of social influence. Number one, self-awareness is primary. That is why we will be doing exercises to help us look in the mirror of how we identify ourselves personally and professionally. 2, capacity to tolerate intensity. We may recognize breathwork as one of the most powerful tools we know for plummeting the depths of our psyche and heights of our spirit. But when the intensity of a session unearths energetically charged beliefs tied to ancestral life and death emotional reactivity, we had best be prepared for monumental releases or reactivity. 3, understanding the dynamics of power and oppression. This does not take a degree in cultural history or analysis, but it does take an appreciation for the influences of multi-generational trauma and how it has been perpetuated consciously by a few and unconsciously by many. 4, capacity to embrace complexity and creative thinking. The topics we are addressing do not lend themselves to simplistic solutions. It requires, beyond an initial awareness, the courage to engage with our clients and find unique ways for them to find their core selves underneath layered cultural self-definitions held in place by seemingly intransient fears. 5, commitment to an ecological or holistic approach. Going into our sessions with an experimental attitude rather than a systematic game plan, allowing for an organic, mutually respectful pathway to authentically emerge is not only more rewarding for all parties, but more cost-effective in the long run because it's empowering to both parties, not just one or the other. Now let's take a brief survey of your present situation around this topic. On handout 1, Cultural Competence, answer section 1. What are the components of cultural competence that you see are most relevant in your practice? And 2, how do you build your cultural competence? Stop the video, complete this exercise, and come back to the video. Now, some may have never considered these questions and are curious or dismissive of their importance to their situation. Remember, this is just the starting place. The next graphic from Josefina Alvarez shows a way of broadly categorizing typical power relationships in the United States. Different countries may have different versions of these categories, but also many similarities. The cultural characteristic of age or generation. The more powerful group is adults, and the less powerful group are children or older adults. The cultural characteristic of disability. The more powerful group are the temporarily able-bodied. The less powerful group are the persons with disabilities. Notice it says temporarily able-bodied because we all at any time could have an accident or a disease that would cause our disability. Cultural characteristic of religion. In this country, more powerful group, Christians. Less powerful group, other religions. Cultural characteristic of ethnicity. European Americans. Less powerful group, all others. Cultural characteristic of social class. More powerful group, upper and middle class. Less powerful group, lower income persons. Cultural characteristics of sexual orientation. More powerful group, heterosexual. Less powerful groups, gay men, lesbians, or bisexuals. Cultural characteristic of indigenous heritage. More powerful group, non-native persons. Less powerful group, native persons. Cultural characteristic of national origin. More powerful group, U.S.-born persons. Less powerful group, immigrants and refugees. Cultural characteristic, gender. More powerful group, men. Less powerful group, women, transgender persons. Now, there are societal situations in which these are overt prejudices and those in which there are unspoken expectations or assumptions that influence how people are treated, what rights they are given, or what can be expected of them. It's the unconscious perceptions and fears that we as breathworkers encounter when the emotional body is tapped into. The reactions and feelings that issue forth during a breathwork session from a client may be more surprising or embarrassing to them than they are to us. Acceptance and self-forgiveness are major tools in the healing of these intersectional woundings. I am suggesting we all have them to some degree or another in our emotional body, even if we intellectually think we are free from any reactivity to the world around us. There are survival instincts to orchestrate the world around ourselves to be as highly familiar to us as we can have it, while keeping it in balance with our desire for novelty. We strive to maintain our personal, quotes, window of tolerance. Let's look at how we identify ourselves currently. On handout 2, self-identity, complete your self-identity rating. Rate yourself on each of these cultural variables: age, generation, disability, religion, ethnicity or race, social class, sexual orientation, indigenous heritage, national origin, gender. Stop the video and complete this exercise and come back to the video. We will be using this later. Basics of cultural competence. Here are some basic aspects of cultural competency for practitioners. Bias is our tendency to think, act, and feel in a particular way. We all have biases. Privilege is access to or enjoying rights or advantages simply by membership of a particular group or identity. This is often unearned and or undeserved. Systems of privilege and oppression include racism, sexism, classism, ableism, ageism, heterosexism, etc. Based on our shared history, what is, quotes, normal for us influences our work as a practitioner. Privilege socializes us to be less aware of our biases and structures that promote them. This is true in any society or subculture. We grow up with certain rights and resources and take them for granted, not realizing that not everyone has them. This could be as simple as the ability to walk down the street and not be harassed or suspected as a criminal. Privilege can be contextual and multidimensional. An individual might have the privilege in one context when contrasted with those who do not have that particular privilege. For example, in our culture, men have the privilege of going shirtless in public, whereas women do not. Women have the privilege of being more affectionate in public with one another than men do. But individuals also interact with a continuum of dimensions of privilege: gender, race, socioeconomic status, etc., consciously or unconsciously all the time, rather than in discrete pockets of privilege. How do you interact with your continuum of privilege or disadvantage? Defensive reactions can also take place to fight fear, pain, or shame. We can be less defensive about privilege if we view it as multidimensional, everyone having advantages and disadvantages, and taking responsibility for awareness of our own and what we are called to do to help equalize a polarizing distribution of rights and privileges. For example, one time in our history in the United States, men had to come to terms with their privilege of the right to vote and recognize the disadvantage that put women in our society. It took this realization and a willingness to change that so that all parties could exercise their rights and privileges and have the society as a whole benefit from it. Humility, self-awareness, and critical thinking facilitate work across lines of privilege and oppression. But they're not enough. Awareness, ongoing learning, and consultation with those outside of our niche are essential. Oppression and Privilege Self-Assessment Tool. To make the topic of privilege more personal, we will review an oppression and privilege self-assessment tool adapted from the work of Diane Goodman and Paul Cavell. The point of this self-assessment is not to induce guilt or pride in those with more culturally identified privilege, nor resentment or shame in those with less. In fact, the point is to root out the unconscious negative feelings around these underlying cultural judgments so that we may more freely learn from one another and grow as breathworkers and members of our society. As we go through these statements, identify the areas in which you have privilege or find yourself at an intersection of oppression. Be kind to yourself. The more we deepen our understanding of ways in which we can advocate for spaces free of prejudice, the more we learn about ourselves and this can result in some personal discomfort. I invite you to lean into this discomfort, allowing these feelings to provide a space for genuine understanding and empathy. Here are the statements of disadvantage and oppression. 1. I worry about not having enough money to pay for housing, food, clothing, or education. 2. I cannot talk openly about who I'm dating or in love with. 3. I face physical barriers assessing public buildings and using the transportation systems. 4. I don't own a car. 5. I cannot afford to travel nationally or internationally, whether it be for pleasure or educational purposes. 6. I worry that people may not hire me because of the color of my skin, my name, the way I look, or my gender. 7. I have a disability. 8. At home while growing up, my family spoke a language other than English. 9. I worry about being harassed or attacked because of my gender or sexual orientation. 10. My gender does not match the gender I was assigned at birth. 11. I tend to see people of my racial or ethnic group portrayed negatively in newspapers, television, movies, and advertisements. 12. Because of financial hardship, I tend to put up with a number of problematic situations. 13. I need to hide, change, or minimize parts of my identity to reduce the chances of mistreatment. 14. The holidays I tend to celebrate are not observed as national holidays. 15. I am not white. 16. I'm not a man. Statements of advantages, privilege. 1. I or my family can afford to live in a comfortable home and have enough money to meet our needs. 2. I can talk openly about my partner or loved one. 3. I can easily use public buildings and transportation systems. 4. I own a car. 5. I can afford to travel nationally or internationally, whether it be for pleasure or educational purposes. 6. I don't worry about being hired because of my appearance, color of my skin, or gender. 7. I don't have a disability. 8. At home while growing up, my family spoke English. 9. I don't worry about being harassed or attacked because of my gender or sexual orientation. 10. My gender matches the gender I was assigned at birth. 11. There are many positive images of people from my racial or ethnic group portrayed positively in newspapers, television, movies, and advertisements. 12. When problematic situations arise, I tend to have the financial means to solve them. 13. I don't need to hide, change, or minimize parts of my identity to reduce the chances of mistreatment. 14. The holidays I celebrate are recognized as national holidays. 15. I am white. 16. I am a man. Now, take the time you need to process the thoughts and feelings that arise for you in this assessment. Turn off the video if you want time and come back when you are ready. Once we are aware of our privileges, for example, the right to vote, as I mentioned, we have the responsibility to help level the playing field where we can to improve the life of everyone. This is our challenge personally and the true challenge for all human beings because we all belong to areas of privilege and non-privilege to some degree. As breathworkers, we are especially called to support this undertaking since breath is the great leveler of judgmental differences created by the mind and reinforced with fear. The next exercise can shed some light on how you have constructed your worldview and how it is held in place by your emotional preferences. On handout 3, your confidants, make a list of your 5 closest emotional confidants, that is, those people with whom you feel most safe in sharing your inner self or vulnerability, and whose advice and feedback you would take most to heart. Put their first name or initials under the numbers on the handout graph. Then, fill in the grid of each one's social categorizations. Notice the degree of sameness or diversity of the ratings of your confidants on handout 3 to your self-ratings in the same categories on handout 2. Make your observations on the bottom of handout 3 by completing what I observe about the similarities and differences overall of my confidence ratings to my self-rating on handout 2. Stop the video, complete this exercise, and come back to the video. Now, this is not to say you should have as many diverse of a group of confidants as possible to be culturally competent, but it might show more of how your emotional body is formed and who it gravitates toward, and where there could be blind spots in your awareness. Can you really see and feel the world through the eyes of those distinctly different from you, as you might imagine you can? How does this impact your work as a breathworker? Again, I'm not saying doing breathwork is impossible with people not in your categories of social identity. I have done breathwork with individuals in every one of the not like me categories listed. We have a commonness of the human spirit. Nonetheless, my consciousness has grown and my worldview expanded by seeing the unique intersectional woundings of each and the undauntedness of their spirit, which has helped them to heal and own their own way of thriving. Privilege Walk stemmed from Peggy McIntosh's concept of white privilege. There's another exercise we will do in our imagination to get a greater feeling for walking in the shoes or more viscerally experiencing the everyday experiences of privilege in our society. This exercise has been done in person with groups around the world with strong impact. Even though we will not be doing this here in person, you can close your eyes and imagine doing this with a diverse group in your community. Here are the instructions. Everyone will stand in a horizontal line in the middle of the room. All participants will have their eyes closed until the end of the exercise. As the facilitator reads a statement or question, the participant will step forward or step back if it applies to them. If anyone feels too uncomfortable to take a step, they have the option to remain still. The facilitator should give participants a heads up about the intensity of the exercise that could provoke certain emotions. Ensure them that the room is a safe place, mentally and emotionally, for conversations to develop at the end of the activity. Objective: raise the awareness of various forms of privilege. Understand the intersectionality of race, socioeconomic class, gender, and other demographic variables that shape individuals. Appreciate the diversity of individual backgrounds and team building. Stepping forward. 1. If one or both of your parents graduated from college, take one step forward. 2. If you ever attended a private school or a summer camps growing up, take one step forward. 3. If you were told by your parents that you were beautiful, smart, or successful, take one step forward. 4. If you knew since you were a child that it was expected of you to go to college, take one step forward. 5. If you have immediate family members who are doctors, lawyers, or work in any degree-required profession, take one step forward. 6. If you studied the history and culture of your ethnic ancestors in elementary and secondary school, take one step forward. 7. If you grew up with people of color or working-class people who were servants, maids, gardeners, or babysitters in your home, take one step forward. 8. If you or your family never had to move due to financial inabilities, take one step forward. 9. If you almost always see members of your race, sexual orientation, religion, and class widely represented on television, in the newspaper, and on the media in a positive manner, take one step forward. 10. If you were to walk into a business and ask to speak to the person, quotes, in charge, you will see a person of your race. Take one step forward. 11. If school and work is not in session during the major holidays or other cultural events that you celebrate, take one step forward. 12. If you feel that people do not interpret your personal opinions as a representation of your entire race, take one step forward. 13. If you almost always feel comfortable with people knowing your sexual orientation, take one step forward. 14. If you feel certain that you will not be followed, harassed, or watched under close surveillance while shopping, take one step forward. 15. If walking alone at night, you never have to worry about anyone feeling threatened because of your presence, take one step forward. Stepping back statements. 16. If you are going to be the first person in your immediate family to graduate from college, take one step back. 17. If you started school speaking a language other than English, take one step back. 18. If you have ever been the only person of your race or ethnicity in a classroom or place of work, take one step back. 19. If you grew up in an economically disadvantaged or single-parent home, take one step back. 20. If you were ever discouraged from any personal goal or dream because of your race, socioeconomic class, gender, sexual orientation, or physical learning disability, take one step back. 21. If you have ever had to sacrifice personal interests for the responsibility of others or other circumstances, take one step back. 22. If you've ever been called names regarding your race, socioeconomic class, gender, sexual orientation, or physical learning disability and felt uncomfortable, take one step back. 23. If you or someone you know has ever been mistrusted or accused of lying, stealing, or cheating without sufficient evidence, take one step back. 24. If you are ashamed or embarrassed of your clothes, house, or car and wish to change it to avoid being judged or teased, take one step back. 25. If you have ever been hesitant to speak to avoid being ridiculed because of your accent or speech impediment, take one step back. 26. If you have ever been mistreated or served less fairly in a place of business because of your race or ethnicity, take one step back. 27. If you never worried about crime, drugs, rape, or any other violent threats in your neighborhood, take one step forward. 28. If you have ever skipped a meal or went away from a meal hungry because there was not enough money to buy food, take one step back. 29. If anyone in your immediate family has ever served time in a state or federal penitentiary, take one step back. 30. If anyone in your immediate family has ever been addicted to drugs or alcohol, take one step back. Okay. Here are some reflection questions. Participants can now open their eyes and remain standing in their positions. Notice who's in front of you, who's beside you, and who's behind you. What was the purpose of this exercise? What did you learn from it? What happened during the exercise? Were you surprised by anything? How did it feel to be in a group that took a step forward or a step back? How did it feel to be in front or back of the room? Was there a time when you wanted to be part of the group moving forward? What might we draw from this exercise that can help us in our everyday lives? And finally, how can you apply what you've learned here to the work you will do as a leader? Again, take the time you need to process the thoughts and the feelings that arise for you in this assessment. It can be beneficial to share your feelings with another participant in this exercise if possible. Turn off the video if you want time and come back when you are ready. Now, as a practitioner, you may be called to help clients and families through the dynamics of intersectionality in their communities. I've worked for a number of years with a white woman and her white husband who had 2 natural children and then adopted a biracial girl whom they attempted to raise the same way they did their natural children. Their adopted daughter is relatively fair-skinned and attractive, and nonetheless was responded to differently from their natural children in their relatively white part of the city. Their adopted daughter began to gravitate towards friends and experiences that were more marginalized Black and Spanish-speaking elements of their city. Over the 10 years after she turned 18, she gave birth to 3 girls by 3 different men of color, none of whom became long-term partners. The first father has spent his life in prison after criminal activities and threats which traumatized my client and her adopted daughter, whose child with this man was developmentally disabled. My client and her husband became the legal guardians of this granddaughter after their adopted daughter admitted she was unable to care for her. Their adopted daughter has since worked to support herself as a single mother and has all 3 of her daughters living with her. Even though my client no longer has the adopted daughter and her 3 granddaughters living with her, she still is the main emotional support for them all, as well as she and her husband being significant financial contributors. Over the years, she has advocated for their adopted daughter and her daughters in educational settings, courts, social service, and community settings. She has directly experienced the effects of discrimination and judgment, even from her own family who purport to love and support her. However, none of them can understand the seeming chaos and, quotes, dysfunction, by their standards, of the lifestyles of my client's adopted daughter and her children. My client feels she literally has no one to talk to outside of therapy that has shown empathy for the lives of her adopted daughter and her daughters. We're working on this. She herself struggles daily with the values implanted in her from her upbringing and the values and behaviors of her adopted family. She sees that the love she has for them and they have for her and her husband has been the major factor that has brought them through innumerable intersectional clashes amongst themselves and with the environment outside them. For me, it's been a humbling learning experience to grow with them through the traumas and triumphs of this family microcosm of our culture's evolution. Indeed, our clients give us the opportunity to learn lessons that are not in any textbook, but evolve through the felt experience of our hearts and our commitment to service. Let's look further at how cultural influences helped shape your perceptions and judgments, and how they impact your practice as a breathworker. On handout 4, My Cultural Influences, answer these 4 questions. How have cultural influences shaped who you are and how clients see you? Next, how do these influences affect your comfort level and ability to work with certain groups? Next, how might your areas of privilege affect your work? And finally, what kinds of assumptions are clients likely to make about you based on what they see and what you share? Again, stop the video, complete this exercise, and come back to the video. As a breathworker, we are a real person in the life of our client with more lasting influence than we may realize because of 1, the significant role we play in the major life changes of our clients. Our clients often come to us or are sent to us in periods of major life shifts when they need support from sources other than ones that might resist their changes. And 2, because of the highly suggestible, non-ordinary medium in which we work. So several factors are built into our practitioner-client relationships that deserve our attention and understanding rather than our denial or avoidance. First, client-practitioner relationships reflect conflicts and power imbalances in the real world. So how we handle them can reinforce the traumas from their past or help to rewrite those scripts in a more self-empowering way. For example, the simple act of admitting we made a mistake or we are wrong about something or learn something from our clients or are grateful for their presence or recognize gifts that they have that we may not. When done genuinely, not as a technique or in a condescending way, can help a major shift in their self-esteem. One of my most influential early breathworkers was the first one ever to get me past my fading out pattern in breathwork. I acknowledged him for his intuitive insight and presence. When he casually asked me about my education and I told him I had a PhD, he cried on the spot. He had not gone past the 3rd grade in formal education, was entirely self-taught, but still carried the wounds of intersectional power differential for his whole life. 2, information about the meaning of identities comes from the client. We can study about different cultures and common power differentials, but the true meaning and emotional impact of them can only come from being with our client. Part of their woundings or trauma may be conscious, but much of it may be buried. And when it emerges in a breathwork session, our ability to be with them in the process is invaluable. Having knowledge and awareness is a good start, but compassion and presence are what heals. 3, relationship may be facilitated by exploration and discussion of cultural differences and similarities. Our knowledge and awareness can be a door opener after a good enough rapport has been established to discuss hot spots and blind spots of both parties. This may come more easily and naturally after a breathwork session or a series of them than before. I've done rather extensive work in the Arab world, but it was after my organizer and co-teacher had exchanged several breathwork sessions that fears we carried both consciously and unconsciously dissolved, and our true, effective partnership and friendship blossomed. This was palpably felt by our students and helped create an atmosphere of safety for their training. 4. Ongoing learning, consultation, self-assessment are necessary for successful work. Loving connection and sharing high states may lay the ground for bonding a relationship. But for your practitioner-client relationship to produce continued growth and healing, ongoing work is necessary for both parties to advance. This is why in breathwork certification training, it's required to take a number of clients through at least 10 sessions, past the honeymoon stage and the original fireworks of early releases, to the deeper work of the emotional highs and lows that a genuine journey affords. Maintaining the integrity of the practitioner-client contract through this journey brings the true maturation of boundaried relationships and mutual empowerment. Greater privilege does not necessarily mean greater life satisfaction. The World Value Survey has undertaken a large-scale measurement of demographic values in all countries over the decades. Results confirm that national averages of self-reported happiness does trend with greater affluence in countries as a whole up to a certain point. Yet, within a country, happiness inequality can fall with rising income inequality. This means the general trend in similarity in the happiness between the rich and the poor can increase while the disparity of income between the rich and the poor increases. So there are other factors relating to our felt life satisfaction than just privilege, status, and income. Other results from the survey show that mental health issues, depression and anxiety across all income levels does create a decrease in self-reported happiness. It's important for breath workers not to assume that privilege inequalities automatically result in a decrease in a person's personal fulfillment. It is adaptation to our inner environment that brings greater life satisfaction, while at the same time, raising the standard of living for everyone tends to increase the overall happiness of the collective. Reducing privilege inequalities is ultimately better for everyone. Helping individuals release their traumas and increase their self-acceptance and well-being is still the road to claiming and owning their original rights and privileges, even in the face of pockets of social resistance. It is precisely by changing the inner environment while working towards social justice that we ascend as a collective. It's a well-known fact that being given or winning a lot of money, for example, the lottery, produces a temporary uplift in a person's outlook on life. But unless there is a shift in one's self-esteem, within 2 years, they are back to the same level of life satisfaction that they were before their, quotes, windfall of income. Social scientists call this the hedonic treadmill. Conversely, a person having an accident and becoming a paraplegic or a quadriplegic after a period of grief generally returns to a similar level of life satisfaction they had before their accident within 2 years. The level of one's happiness can be changed, but it is seldom external events which make permanent changes. External events or changes in status can often be a distraction to becoming one with our inner source, which is the key to a steady state of inner peace and fulfillment. As a breath worker, we're here to work on the inner level first, and then follow the calling as to how we can manifest changes in the outer levels of all life on the planet. Doing our inner daily work with the spirit of breath nurtures the ever-evolving understanding of who we are and opens the door to a greater understanding of those to whom we're called to serve. Understanding practitioner-client identities. Questions rather than assumptions, when asked respectfully, are some of our best tools we have as practitioners to enhance mutual understanding. Here are some basic questions to ask your clients and yourself to further this process, detailed on Handout 5, Understanding Practitioner-Client Identities. Questions for clients. Would you tell me about your cultural identity or background? What was your religious upbringing? Do you have religious or spiritual practice now? What did your parents do for a living? What was your family's economic situation growing up? Do you have experiences with disability? What did it mean to grow up as a male or female in your family and culture? Questions for practitioners. What are the intersectional influences on this client? What are the client's salient identities related to each influence? What are the meanings of these identities? How are my salient identities interfacing with those of my client? Am I knowledgeable of those groups with which the client identifies? To-dos for a culturally competent practitioner. 1. Put client history in socio-cultural historical context. 2. Look for the client's strengths and supports. 3. Explore the client's conceptualization of the problems and coping they have. 4. Work collaboratively on goals and steps to reach them. 5. Consider cultural adaptations of sessions. Remain flexible. 6. Keep in mind culturally related outcome expectations. As breathworkers, I believe we have a commitment to ongoing self and community education, which holds the spiritual sacredness of every individual and the ongoing learning and new understanding about human dynamics in the healing process, which involves intersectionality. Both of these skills keep us fresh and growing as individual practitioners and as a community of professionals. For extra credit, to yourself that is, it would be very fruitful to share with another open-minded and open-hearted person your reactions and insights that you've discovered in this exercise and how it can be useful in your practice of breathwork. I am grateful for having a community of self-reflecting practitioners dedicated to learning, growing, and sharing the spirit of breath. This is what has nourished my life work since the mid-1970s and inspires me to this day.